Hi. So, I should probably preface this story by explaining a bit of my background. I'm a woman in my late 20s from Switzerland, and I have believed in the Fae since I can remember. I've experienced many different things in the realm of the paranormal. I love your channel and have thoroughly enjoyed hearing all the stories on here, partially also because they, in a way, have reawakened my belief in the Fae and made me think differently about the things I experienced in my childhood that for a long time I had always tried to rationalize. Like, for example, when I was a kid in our garden at home, I used to talk to my quote unquote imaginary friends, as my family would call them. I remember these creatures were tiny, nature inspired little things, kind of like wooden sticks or grass come to life, but with humanoid bodies and insectile wings, some looking more human than others. They would talk to me telepathically. As I grew older, I remember only seeing them as like glitter in the air. I remember them being friendly. I also had a friend that lived in a tree. My brother tells a story to this day how he caught me one day talking to a fir tree, sitting cross legged in front of it in the grass. Apparently, I was talking to the tree as if it was a person who was talking back to me. My brother said he asked me why I was talking to the tree, and I replied, I'm not talking to the tree, silly. I'm talking to the tree spirit that lives in the tree. I only vaguely remember this conversation myself, but I remember being devastated when my parents had to cut that tree down for renovations. I remember fighting with everything I had for that tree to be kept. Sadly, I lost that battle, and I remember weeping for days. I would also often wander in the woods with my dog as a kid. There was this one special place in the woods that I loved. In this one spot, the path suddenly split and curved into a trail shaped like a horseshoe, which was next to a beautiful clearing with a stream. That's where I'd often felt a presence and felt and heard things. It was full of life. I remember this place felt like going into a parallel world. It felt good there. Whatever presence was there felt helpful, though at times mischievous. I would spend hours there. But to get to this beautiful place, I had to pass this old castle ruin. I didn't like the ruin. There wasn't much to it, some stone steps that led to a few crumbling walls and a wooden door, which led to a keep. But it all felt dark and forbidding, and I used to rush past it to get to the horseshoe trail and the magical clearing. So, this one time, I was 11 and on the phone to one of my best friends. I was walking my dog like normal, walking up the hill headed towards the old castle ruin on my way to the horseshoe path. As I was walking and talking, my dog stopped dead in her tracks. She was staring at the castle ruin at the entrance to the keep. The hairs on her neck stood up, and she started growling. It was a low growl that I had never heard her make until that day. My dog was such a sweet, gentle girl usually, so right away I knew something was very wrong. I told my friend on the phone what was happening, and then listened to try and figure out what had spooked my dog. I couldn't hear anything unusual. I stared at the ruin, at the huge wooden door to the keep, and thought to myself, how creepy would it be if that door opened? And then it did. The door swung open, and this creature walked out from under the ruined doorframe. This thing was huge. I estimate it was about 2 meters tall. a creature of some sort standing on its hind legs. It had long, shaggy, light brown fur covering its entire body. The hind legs were curved backward, like a wolf's or a goat's, and it had hooves, I think kind of like a deer. The front legs or arms were dangling at each side, humanoid like but abnormally long, and it had huge, big hands with long fingers, kind of like an orangutan's, and they were clawed, I'm pretty sure. The head was elongated, and it had a snout. Its ears pointed downward and looked similar to a cow's, and I think it had horns. Its eyes were the worst part. Big, slanted, and pitch black. I stared at it, speechless. I heard my friend frantically on the other side of the phone, shouting, "What's up? What's wrong? Or what are you seeing? Hello? Hello? Are you still there?" The creature turned its head and looked directly at me and stared me down like it was staring into my soul. This must have lasted only a few seconds, though it felt so much longer. Then it launched forward and came leaping towards me down the stone steps on all fours. I think I screamed. My dog and I turned around in the same instant and booked it out of there. I could hear my friend shouting through the phone, which I held gripped in my hand. I didn't try to reply. I just ran. Then I heard a flapping sound like huge wings right above me, and something scratched the back of my head. It burned. I looked up and saw this female thing. It was part bird and part humanoid. She had dark hair, dark, glowing, cat-like eyes, and her mouth. I'm not even sure she had one. It all happened so fast. I think she might have had a beak. Then I heard this evil voice say, "Get out and never come back. This is our place." I ran without stopping till I reached civilization. When me and my dog could no longer run, we simultaneously stopped to catch our collective breaths. As soon as I could, I explained to my friend on the phone what happened. Thankfully, she believed me. That's when I noticed a warm feeling at the back of my head. It was blood. Whatever that thing was, it had actually scratched the back of my head. I haven't told this story to many people. I know it sounds crazy, but that's my experience. You can choose to believe it or not. If you do believe me, please let me know what you think this creature was, because to this day I'm not sure. Was it an unseelie fae creature, or a demon, or something else entirely? I do believe and know in my heart that the other creatures I encountered in those woods down the horseshoe path were different types of fae, more benevolent ones. But this thing? I don't know. It was terrifying. And had my dog not been there or my friend on the phone, I might have thought I had just imagined the whole thing. I've tried to come up with reasonable explanations to rationalize it as I grew older. Maybe it was a man in a costume? Or an owl attack? Let me know what you think. Like I said, I don't know what it was. I just know there's something out there in those woods, lurking. Something that we humans have no idea about. I was walking my dog down a forest trail that I am very familiar with. For a little context, the forest in question is a nature park people in my village tend to use as they please. I love this place a lot, having fond memories of pretending to be a dinosaur, a knight, or something as I stomped through it. Now, I've always had some belief there might be spirits like the fair folk out there, as a general better safe than sorry rule. However, I'd never experienced anything supernatural myself. I was feeling adventurous during this particular walk, and I am somewhat ashamed to admit I was hoping to run into one of the fair folk to just have a chat with them. I didn't want to take anything from them, just chat. I even called out to them. In hindsight, this was a very stupid thing to do. As I continued on the walk, I started to feel like I was being watched. I became inexplicably anxious, and suddenly every movement in the bushes had me on edge. Something just felt different, like I wasn't completely welcome there anymore. Then my dog suddenly stopped and looked up the trail, then turned right around and began heading back the way we came, with her tail between her legs. As we moved, my dog kept pausing to check behind her before moving on. We continued quickly along the trail, and I noticed a strange marking at the base of one of the trees that looked like two doors attached together. A few days later, I decided to take my dog through the woods a second time. This time, I chose not to go down that particular path. But as I passed the entrance to it, I noticed the strange door-like mark on the base of the tree wasn't there. This creeped me out. I was sure I had seen that mark, and that this was the same tree I had seen it on. I decided to go down the same path again with my dog, just to make sure it was the same one and I hadn't been imagining things. I know I'd seen that mark. I was on edge from the very beginning this time, and ready in case something happened. Eventually, we came to the spot where my dog had suddenly turned back last time. And just as before, my dog stopped and then turned around again and headed away quickly in the opposite direction with her tail between her legs. I took a few steps towards my dog, and then I heard something. Already freaked out, both my dog and I took off at a run down the trail. As we ran, I could hear things in the bushes, moving and coming closer. Something was chasing us. Soon we came to a fork in the trail. I tried to lead my dog down the path on the left, but my dog stopped and refused to go down that way. I stopped, and we stayed there for a few moments and listened. I couldn't hear anything now moving in the bushes, but I had a bad feeling. I felt strongly that something was waiting down the path on the left, something that didn't mean us well. I took the dog down the path on the right side instead. As we hurried toward the end of the path, I kept looking for the strange door-like mark on the surrounding trees, hoping I had just been confused before about what tree it had been on. But I couldn't find it anywhere. It was gone. As we ran, my dog kept turning her head and looking behind us as if she was checking to see if we were being followed. We got out of there unscathed. Reflecting on the experience, the whole time I was on that path, I felt unwelcome and uneasy, something I had never felt before in that forest. It was such a strong feeling that now I just feel thankful that I was able to get out of there in one piece. There's no way to know this for certain, but I think I might have offended something in the woods when I called out to the fair folk, and they were letting me know it. Well, I definitely learned my lesson. Feeling calm and at peace in the forest is a gift that I took for granted. I disturbed the peace of the forest, and in response, they disturbed the peace I used to feel when I was in those woods. It was a mistake, one I will never make again. The story I'm going to share with you is actually not mine, but my father's, although I heard the story first from my mother. I never really believed it, to be honest, because my dad is kind of a silly person. Even so, when I asked him to retell the story to me himself, his demeanor changed completely. I'm going to try to retell it to you today as best as possible because it's been a while since I've heard it or seen my father. So, my dad grew up in Nicaragua as a child with his siblings under the care of their grandmother. Since there were a lot of children, my grandmother never really had a close eye on any of them. My dad, being one of the eldest, was told to go to the market and try to sell candies to help out a little. He was probably maybe 7 or 8 at the time. His family didn't really have money for toys or much food, and he was trusted to be alone most of the time because it was the norm. One of these days, on the way back home, he heard some high pitched voices. They sounded extremely close, as if the voices were in his ear. This freaked him out because he was alone and his grandmother lived really close to the forest part of Nicaragua. Like, literally, he told me he used to have monkeys sometimes come into their backyard. Anyway, he looked around to see where the voices came from, and in the distance, from the top of one of the trees, he could see little men, a group of them. They were calling to him to come and play. They even teased him with a ball. My dad wanted the ball, but said something felt very off. And even as a child, he knew something wasn't right about this. He turned around and continued the walk home, thinking that would be the end of it. Just a heads up, he was wrong. It happened again, multiple times, in fact. The little men continued to appear to my dad when he was alone, walking back from the market. They kept calling to him from the trees, attempting, it would seem, to lure him. But my dad continued to ignore them. Then eventually it happened while he was at home. On this occasion, my dad had been sitting on top of a water heater behind the house, like he often did, when he heard the same voices again, exactly as he had on his way home from the market. Again, it was like the voices were whispering directly into his ear, as if these creatures were standing right behind him. He looked around and spotted the same group of little men he had seen in the forest. They were high in a tree which stood quite a long way from his home, and they were holding something else that he couldn't make out from afar. He thought it might be a toy of some kind. This happened several more times, always when he was alone and no one was watching him. He told me it frightened him even now to think about those little men, because they probably knew he would be out there by himself and what his routine was, which was why they were able to find him so often in the same places. I asked my dad what he thought would have happened if he had gone out to them, but he never did answer me. Instead, he just gave me a long pause, accompanied by a stare filled with mild terror. I don't bring up this topic anymore for his sake, even though it does interest me. I've had a few weird experiences myself, but never to the extent that my dad experienced. I really do love your channel, though. I'm a bit of a loner myself and went through an isolated state during high school. And the stories you share bring me joy and something to look forward to on rainy days like today. They remind me that there's much more to this world than we might think. There's a hiking trail not far from where I live. I often walk it for exercise. During the summer of 2018, I started to notice that some of the trees on either side of the trail had signs of damage, what looked like small burn marks here and there, as if someone had held a lighter up to the tree bark. I thought it was strange. The damage had affected multiple trees that weren't close to each other, and I couldn't come up with a rational explanation for how this had happened, aside from that a person had cut through the brush and burnt several trees just enough to make a burn mark, but no more than that. But why would anyone do that? Plus, this was the middle of the summer, and the undergrowth in the forest was very thick. Someone would have had to cut through the brambles and burrs and poison ivy to even get to those trees. So it was a mystery. The number of these mysteriously damaged trees seemed to increase as time went on. At first, there were only one or two, but after a period of maybe a few weeks, there were probably about half a dozen trees damaged in this way. Now, on one side of the trail, there was this giant, beautiful oak tree. Very deep in the woods, the trail curved right past this tree, which stood on the top of a slope. The area around the tree was also very beautiful. The grass and moss that grew at the foot of the tree were vibrantly green in a way that made it stand out from the rest of the forest. I used to always think of this tree as the king of the forest, and the area around it as its little kingdom. I say used to because sadly this tree was struck by lightning and destroyed. One morning, a few weeks after I had started noticing the strange damage on the other trees, I was walking along the path as I normally did and noticed the king of the forest oak tree had been sliced nearly in two and was scorched black. Clearly, it had been struck by lightning, and it was just fortunate that it had burned itself out and that the whole forest hadn't been set on fire. As I stood there and gazed at the poor destroyed oak, I heard something rustling in the bush behind me. I turned around and saw a man in a hooded cloak standing deep in the underbrush. I can't describe the man too well as his face was mostly hidden and he was quite a distance away from me. But he seemed to be of average height for a man, had dark hair, and his cloak was brown, similar to tree bark. He was staring at me. Then he disappeared behind a tree and did not appear again. I stood there confused. I had a strong sense that something was off about this man, that he wasn't human. But at the same time, I was telling myself that I was imagining things, that the man would reappear on the other side of the tree he had ducked behind, and I would see that he was a hiker or just an ordinary person. Then a thought popped into my head that I never would have come up with myself. It was like this thought had been planted in my mind telepathically. And the most frightening thing was that I heard the thought in a voice that wasn't mine. The voice said, "This forest is in dispute. You are in danger. Leave now." I was so spooked by this random foreign voice and thought in my head that I turned around and pretty much ran out of there. It was the strangest thing. I went from sadly but calmly gazing at the lightning-struck oak tree to seeing this hooded man in the woods to running like my life depended on it in a matter of about 30 seconds. I was so freaked out by this incident, I didn't return to that hiking trail for the rest of that summer. But I finally worked up the nerve to return that October. The oak that had been struck by lightning was still there, blackened and split, but parts of the tree had been sliced off, probably by local forestry officials, and a pile of cut branches sat next to the once beautiful tree. This time, I didn't notice any of the smaller burn marks I had noticed on scattered trees during the summer, and I started to wonder whether I had imagined them, because they wouldn't have just grown over that quickly. But then I remembered that thought and that voice in my head, and I felt a chill run through my body. I'm certain that this was something I would never have come up with myself. I think some other species, similar to humans but not human, lives in that forest. Fairies are the best explanation I can come up with. And for whatever reason, in the summer of 2018, I think they were at war. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the subscribers who submitted their stories for this one. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments. I'll be there joining the discussion today, answering questions and reacting to comments and suggestions for future content. If you have a story to share, you can check out my website at scaryfairygodmother.com, link in the description. It has a spot where you can submit your stories, comments, questions, or suggestions. You can also sign up for my mailing list there. It's free to sign up. If you do submit your story or have submitted it in the past and I haven't narrated it yet, that doesn't mean I won't. I'm really trying to get to them all, so if you do submit, eventually you probably will hear your own story on this channel. So thank you so much for taking the time to share it with me. I really love reading all your stories. As always, special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon and to anyone who has joined the channel or made a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi. I really appreciate you guys so much and the support you are giving this work. If you like this content and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page and the other support options in the description below. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers, so thanks to everyone who submitted. These stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons. Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It really helps the channel when you do that. And hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.